ReZero, Side Story, Golden Siblings, Part 1, Chapter 1.
Garf, let us go out. Garfield tilted his head at such an invitation at fire hour, with the clear sunlight shining beautifully. Curled up in the garden of the mansion, he had just been grooming himself. There was no need to groom himself in that particular spot, but he couldn't help but feel most at ease within that part of the mansion grounds. Although there was a room reserved for Garfield in the mansion, he was hesitant to sleep anywhere that his own scent had not already seeped into. Therefore, instead of staying in one spot, Garfield spent his days in various locations throughout the mansion, his behavior having no rhyme or reason. Whenever Otto or the others had business with Garfield, they had to wander around the mansion aimlessly, meaning, the only person who could find Garfield in one try was Frederica, who currently stood right in front of him except for Ram, whose side Garfield would come to if she called him. Frederica, who shared many points with his appearance, with her long blonde hair and emerald green eyes, was Garfield's biological sister. To be precise, they were siblings from different fathers, but neither of them seemed to care much about that. If they were to worry about something, there were more important things than that to be concerned about. For example, the long years they had spent apart. Garfield and Frederica spent over a decade apart. Garfield was 14 years old and had lived apart from his older sister for more years than he had lived with her now. Still, a beastman's blood was a strange thing, and it would be impossible to mistake a person with the same blood in their veins for another. No matter how much her appearance had changed since they separated, he could tell that she was his blood relative, for whom he had had complicated feelings for a long time. Garfield, Frederica, Garf, is something wrong? Frederica asked the suddenly silent Garfield. Uncharacteristically lost in his own musings, Garfield shook his head and said, "Nah, Garfield, you kinda not used to sis being so huge and so, Frederica, please stop saying huge this and huge that about a woman's height and physique, geez, Garfield, say that before you hit me." Garfield's head was in his hands, thanks to the greater than expected retaliation to the comment he had inadvertently blurted out. Sighing at her brother's state, Frederica gazed at her own shoulders. Frederica, I would love to be cute and dainty too. Not to say like grandmother or Petra, but at least a physique like Ram's. Garfield, like Granny you got no hope, but that little kid is still growing up. Besides, lookin' like Ram. Don't make me laugh. Frederica, I would love to know more about that laugh, and what it means. Frederica exuded a sense of dread as she put her hand over her mouth and hid her fangs while smiling. Pressured by this, Garfield swallowed hard and lightly clicked his fangs. Garfield, so? What you talkin' about? What do you mean, go out? Frederica, again with the happy-go-lucky misdirection. Sigh, very well. If we were to go off on a tangent and waste time on it, we would be putting the cart before the ground dragon. Garfield attempted to change the subject, and Frederica was taken aback, but took him up on it. Then Frederica held up one finger and said, Frederica, actually, I have the day off after lunch. So I thought we should go out to the city together. That is why I came to ask you out, and that was what she said.
Chapter 2.
The sanctuary had been liberated, and Garfield had stepped onto land outside of his home village for the first time in his life. In reality, he had stepped foot outside the sanctuary half a day before its liberation, but he had realized the magnitude of his action at the same moment as the sanctuary's residents had. Garfield, to be honest, Garfield had his doubts when it came to that matter. In the sanctuary, he had clashed with Subaru and his friends, and although he had been up against many at once, he had still been forced to submit and had surrendered to them. He knew that if he had not cooperated with them to break the barrier, the village would have been swallowed up by the swarm of the Great Rabbit, and its residents would all have been killed. Even so, Garfield still felt some doubt as he gazed at the snow-covered landscape of the sanctuary. He thought to himself, how unreasonably stubborn it had been for him. No doubts, no hesitation, straightforward. Many originally viewed Garfield as such a decisive person, but in Garfield's opinion, that was ridiculous. He had always thought that there had never been anyone before or since who had sweated the small things as much as him, so that was why he was drawn to truly decisive people, he thought. One of the best examples of that was Garfield's dearest love. I see, with Frederica. That seems quite all right. Why don't you go have some fun, Garfield? Well duh, my amazing self wouldn't be turning it down either, but Garfield couldn't hide his confusion, as if saying he didn't know what to do. Ram, who was folding the laundry in front of Garfield, mumbled, "Such a fool," without looking directly at him. Frederica had invited Garfield to go out with her, and he had reluctantly agreed. However, he could not quite grasp the significance of his sister's offer, so he used the short time he had before meeting up with her to come to Ram for advice. However, there was not much to discuss with her. He just tilted his head in concern, not understanding the meaning of Frederica's offer, or maybe it was just a dig at Garfield, given the events that happened in the sanctuary. Ram, that would be a misguided presumption. Frederica simply wants to make up with you, Garf. She is happy to be reunited with her estranged brother. Even if it is a brother like you, Garfield, I don't like how you're phrasing it there. It's like, tomorrow's a cloudy day for Amelie. Ram, what? You cannot believe Ram's words? Ram stared at Garfield, scratching his short blonde hair and scrunching his cheeks. Garfield's eyes were pierced by the sharp gaze of the woman of his dreams, and he involuntarily straightened his posture. Ram, you've come a long way, haven't you? What in the world have you become, Garfield? Don't you get me wrong, there's nothing I believe more than Ram's words, other than grannies, the captains, and also anyway, there ain't too much else, Ram. Foolish. But that is the kind of thing Ram likes about you, Garfield. Oh, yeah? What part? Garfield blushed when Ram smiled at him. Reflecting back on his remarks, he was unable to see the answer as to what in the world he had been praised for. The answer, it seemed to him, was that he had not been able to narrow down which thing was the most important. It seemed to him to be an unmanly answer. Anyway, Ram, if you can trust that much, then trust Frederica too. At the very least, Ram can assure you that Frederica is thinking of Garf. Ram stopped folding laundry and said, because, Ram is also an older sister, just like Frederica. As an older sister, Ram knows exactly what that feels like. Garfield, that person is. Garfield expressed his sullenness at Ram's remark. Reflexively moving his gaze, he saw the sleeping face of the girl who was the cause of his sullen face. It was a girl sleeping in her bed, faintly breathing. Her face was the spitting image of Ram's, the only differences seeming to be the color of her hair and eyes. Rem, that was her name, and she was the twin sister of Ram, so it seemed. It was a strange thing to say that it seemed, since Garfield and Ram had known each other for nearly a decade and, of course, her twin sister should have been no stranger to them. No one remembered the existence of Rem except for Natsuki Subaru now. Garfield, beside her quiet sister's sleeping face, Ram was folding laundry that smelled of the sun. Everyone in the mansion knew that she had been visiting her sister's bedroom for some time now, even within Ram, who said that there were no memories of Rem left. Still, Ram went to visit her sister frequently, trying to fill the void of what was missing. Ram, that is what an older sister does. Garfield didn't say anything. Ram, yeah? Maybe not. Then it is Ram monologuing. Precious, right. At Ram's remarks, Garfield tried to click his fangs out of habit. However, he hesitated to do so because he felt it would disturb the sleeping Rem. But Garfield was not sure about which was the right choice in this case. Ram, it is not like Garf to be considerate. Garfield, well, sorry, that I'm not acting like myself. Sullenly, Garfield averted his gaze. Turning his head to the side, Ram, it's not quite like there was anything wrong with that. Garfield's heart was thrown for a loop as he heard those gentle words from Ram.
Chapter 3.
Frederica nay summer, it's wonderful. Petra's round eyes lit up when she saw Frederica, who had changed outfits from her maid uniform. With her light brown hair cut to neck length, she looked like a girl who embodied the word lovely. Looking at Petra's cheerful face, one could not help but smile. Frederica, I am. Putting her hand over her mouth, she restrained the laxness caused by Petra's cuteness. She admonished herself in order to maintain her dignity, both as a senior maid and as a surrogate older sister. Though Petra's cuteness was a blow to her dignity, Frederica barely held her own at the water's edge. Petra's pure eyes constantly tested Frederica's inner strength. For Frederica, who always strived for perfection, Petra was simultaneously her greatest enemy and greatest ally. Petra, Frederica née Summer, did you hear me? Frederica, what was that? I am sorry, I was just a little distracted. Upon looking, it seemed that Petra was slightly puffed up, as Frederica had not heard some of what had been said. Such a situation was adorable, but telling her about it only would make her pout more. Frederica said, I am sorry, apologizing. Frederica, so, what were you talking about? Petra, so, I was telling you that the master is terrible. If he was going to give Frederica née Summer the day off, he should have told us earlier, not on the day of. Since then, Frederica, since then, Petra, I would have prepared more for Frederica née Summer. Everyone looked helpless in front of Petra, whose upper red cheeks were puffed up in anger. Petra's anger was directed at Roswell, the owner of the mansion who had granted Frederica a half-day off. Roswell was the object of animosity of most of the people in the mansion for a number of reasons, but Petra was the one that had the greatest amount of resentment. As for Frederica, Roswell was a man for whom she owed a debt of gratitude that words could not describe. Because of that relationship, Frederica would have liked to defend Roswell. Frederica, the master has blundered such that there is no excusing him. Even if a person was a great benefactor, some deeds were not worthy of being defended. Roswell's actions had been just like that, and Frederica had given up on diffusing Petra's anger, although Frederica at least tried not to look too harshly upon the same incident. Besides, because of those circumstances, Petra was now eager to complain about everything Roswell did, from one thing to another, hence her anger. Frederica, but it was the master who told me to go out with Garth. Petra, are you sure you are not appreciative of that? Petra, But in the case of the master, the deducted points from before are so much more than that. Frederica, you are being stubborn. But I cannot change that, either. Unfortunately, she failed to correct the image of Roswell within Petra. In that situation, it was debatable whether Petra was being stubborn or whether Roswell's deeds were that much of a stubborn stain. As previously mentioned, Roswell's granting of a half-day off to Frederica was abrupt. He also specified using that time off as time to be spent with Garfield. Frederica, the master knows everything, doesn't he? She muttered to herself only quietly, because Petra's good look would disappear otherwise. No doubt Petra, at least, would not be pleased with Frederica's characterization of Roswell as such. With consideration for her newly formed sisterhood, Frederica placed her hand on her chest and closed her eyes. There lay her true feelings. To Frederica, Roswell was a magician, not a magician as a mere profession or skill, but a magician in the sense that he was a special being that could do anything. It seemed as if he knew everything and could anticipate everything. This was still the case even now that Emilia and the others had subverted his schemes involving the sanctuary, because that was how Roswell was. The reunion of the older sister and younger brother, which had happened at the time of the liberation of the sanctuary, and the subsequent awkwardness of their relationship must have been well known to him. In order to remain in the same camp going forward, it would be best to resolve that rift as soon as possible. She thought that must have been the true meaning for the half-day off. Leaving Frederica's inner turmoil aside, Petra, despite her anger, was helping her get ready for the day. Frederica did not have a lot of plain clothes, as she usually spent most of her time in her maid uniform. However, Petra transformed these few options by combining them and altering them in different ways, and as if by magic, Frederica became more and more colorful. Frederica née Summer is tall and has long legs, so she looks wonderful no matter what she wears. Frederica, it seems to me like Petra is a bit of a magician, too. Petra, I really don't want to share a job with the master. From Frederica's point of view, it was the highest form of praise, but Petra dismissed it with a smile. Even though she felt sad, Petra's finished decorating Frederica with her magic. Petra, it's finished. What great results! Petra gazed at her finished work on Frederica, her eyes filled with a sense of accomplishment and admiration. Frederica's eyes widened as she examined herself in the dressing mirror, basking in Petra's rapturous praise. Unlike her usual maid outfit, her jacket and skirt were made of loose-fitting fabric, and her jewelry, while not gaudy, was somewhat ornate, and from top to bottom, she was finished in shades that complemented her blonde hair and emerald green eyes. With Frederica's usual attire, this kind of outfit would not be the first thing that came to mind. Petra, phew, that was satisfying. Let's dress up Emilia Summer and the others together next time. Frederica, Petra, you are changing the purpose of this. Petra, Noticing her own excitement, Petra cupped her head as if to reflect. Frederica gazed with a smile at such a gesture, and once again turned her attention back to her appearance. Despite only going out with her younger brother, she seemed to have put a good bit of enthusiasm into it. Frederica, it's a great battle emotionally speaking, is it not? And then, taking a deep breath, Frederica brushed a hand through her long blonde hair.
Chapter 4.
The mansion was named the New Roswell Mansion, according to Natsuki Subaru. The former mansion was burned down for various reasons, and due to that, the Emilia camp now resided in a different mansion. Most importantly, this one had a much older history as a mansion. The burned one was a subsidiary residence of the Mathers family, while this one was the main residence of the Mathers family. The size of the mansion was the same as the one that burned down, although this one was more convenient, due to the famous industrial city of Costul, one of the 5 great cities of the Kingdom of Lagunica, at its doorstep. Since there was only one small village near the former mansion, she was told that it was inconvenient in many areas, such as buying necessities. If so, it still remained a mystery as to why anyone would choose to settle in such a remote location. Frederica, you see, the master is quite the eccentric, is he not? Garfield, ain't that sorta a wild conclusion, though? At Frederica's answer, founded in Roswell's personality, Garfield frowned. Even if the answer was correct, it was hardly what Garfield wanted. And then there's the fact that, to begin with, Garfield, my amazing self doesn't want to listen to anything else about that bastard Roswell. Frederica, that is right. I am sorry, I will be more careful. Garfield clicked his fangs in displeasure, and Frederica apologized with downcast eyes. The self-reflective look on his older sister's face made Garfield regret his ill-chosen words. He didn't know how to put it, but he was like this with his sister in all of his exchanges with her. This awkwardness did not exist when he challenged the Bowel Hunter at the mansion in order to save their lives. However, as soon as he left that deadly battlefield, he didn't know what to say. When Frederica showed up at the meeting place in an outfit that was not her maid uniform, he was so surprised and bewildered that he was left speechless. Garfield's throat trembled as he realized this is what it meant to be thrown off. Originally, Garfield avoided having thoughts about Frederica as much as possible during their time apart. This was not out of dislike for his sister, but because he thought it would be pointless. Garfield was ready to stay in the sealed sanctuary, believing he would never see his sister again. As a result of the collapse of his assumptions and the reunion with his sister, Garfield was unsure of what to say to her. So consciously trying not to think about it had, in the end, backfired. If this were Ram he was dealing with, there would be no shortage of topics to talk about because he is always thinking about her. Presently, after getting stuck on the subject, topics of conversation such as Roswell, whom they share in common as a subject, got brought up, and so on and on in a vicious circle like never before. While Garfield continued to agonize over this, Frederica was facing the same problem. However, in her case, unlike Garfield, she did not have a history of intentionally pushing her estranged brother out of her thoughts. On the contrary, she never forgot her family, even for a single moment. Despite their distance, Garfield and Yazoo were irreplaceable family members to Frederica. Nothing had changed since their reunion. Swiftly said, Frederica's problem seemed simple. There were so many things she wanted to talk about, but she didn't know what to talk about. Sending Frederica's rather astute mind sinking, the various questions and answers she had prepared in advance of her reunion with her brother came up one after another in a flurry of questions and answers. Frederica was bright, yet compassionate. Frankly, she wanted to know everything about Garfield during their time apart, but was too afraid to go for it and ask questions that might put him off. A family that finally reunited. What if a rift were to emerge with said family that would be unrelated to distance or time? The thought of it made the hairs on Frederica's entire body stand on end. Her mind was so agitated that she was about to transform into a beast for no reason. Frederica, the fact that she went out in a different outfit with Petra's help now seemed like a mistake. Not because of Petra, but because of Frederica's ever-present attitude. Naturally, Garfield was dressed in his usual attire, and Frederica was the only one dressed up. Perhaps it was this preparation that made Garfield feel defensive. Frederica, well, you see, Garfield, well, their voices overlapped just as they were about to make up their minds and change the subject. Frederica, they crushed each other's start and created a tenuous atmosphere where it became awkward to move. Frederica, Garf, you should speak first. Garfield, well, sis, I think it'd be better if you said something first. And, when both parties began to yield the reins of the conversation to the other, the issue turned into a quagmire. Ultimately, both sides were unable to say anything, and silence once again fell between the two. The two of them walked side by side for a while, awkwardly passing the time like that. The trip was uneventful, and the two were now in sight of the industrial city of Costul. Frederica, this town is always bustling, as usual. The road from the mansion merged into a large highway along the way, and after giving way to a hastily moving dragon carriage, the industrial city gently came into view in the distance. Prided as the largest among Lagunica's 5 great cities, not for nothing, Costul had a population of nearly 100,000 residents and was a large city. Naturally, with its vast area that corresponded to its population, and the various establishments and people that came and went to support it, it would be quite a spectacular sight to see the cityscape for the first time. In short, Garfield, Frederica, Garfield's emerald green eyes, open wide, eagerly gazing at the city, was the ideal image of a countryside man who had come to the big city. Garfield, well, it's a lot different in person, ain't it? They say, Gassock is bigger than it sounds, don't they? Frederica, an idiom with a very succinct thought. Well, before that, was this Garf's first visit to Costul? Garfield's unexpected response caught Frederica by surprise. It had already been more than 10 days since moving out of the sanctuary and into the current mansion. During that time, Frederica had frequented Costul numerous times. Of course, Frederica and Garfield's roles at the mansion were different, hence the discrepancy between the two. Garfield gave Frederica an awkward look, and said, "What's wrong with that, Garfield? It couldn't be helped, you know. I was busy setting up the mansion first, you know. So I left looking around outside for later." Frederica, placing a scent, that is, Frederica was taken aback by her brother's sulky remark, and put her hands to her forehead. Even though he did not know anything about the world outside of the sanctuary, such behavior is indeed unacceptable, and could only be described as eccentric. For one, a lesson in outside common sense was in order. Frederica, it is all right, Garf. You are newly relocated from your old home now, and you have a lot to learn, a lot to. Garfield, sis. Are you okay? You sick? Garfield stared up in astonishment when Frederica stopped mid-speech and covered her face with both hands. Frederica groaned for a moment, then shook her head, saying, no. Frederica, as I recall, 10 years ago, when I first left the sanctuary, I did exactly the same thing as you, Garf." Looking back on her actions, Frederica was struck by the shock coming a decade too late. For Frederica, it was exactly 10 years ago, but at that time, she, like Garfield, exhibited a variety of eccentric behaviors due to the anxiety of being away from her hometown and her lack of common sense behaviors that now can only be described as eccentric. In addition to putting their own scent all over the mansion, she often prowled around late in the night to check on her territory and to instill a hierarchical relationship with the animals living in the surrounding area. The list went on and on. Frederica, well, at that time, Klein, who was the head servant, disciplined me to correct it, and, what a surprise. I had no idea that Garf and I were so much like sister and brother. Garfield, what you surprised about? Course it's normal for my amazing self and sis to be like sister and brother. Garfield scratched his head and sighed as Frederica quivered and trembled. However, Frederica looked up with a start when Garfield said that to her. Garfield, sis. Frederica, no. No, you are right. It is a matter of course. It is a normal thing for us to be alike. Gently patting herself on the chest, Frederica smiled at Garfield. Garfield's now seemingly obvious comment lightened the load on her chest. Absolutely, her younger brother is right. No matter how long they have been apart, no matter what they have talked about since their reunion, Frederica and Garfield were still siblings. There was nothing to be excessively fearful of. Frederica, he, thanks to you, I am unburdened. Well done, Garfield, just when I thought you were going all ooh and ah and stuff, you suddenly look all relaxed. Hell's going on with ya? Sis, did you start going all senile like Granny T, GKH? Frederica, that was a few too many words, you said. No, it is more than a few extra abusive words when you take into account that outburst against your grandmother. You should reflect on that, Garfield, why you don't have to hit me over it, you know. Garfield looked at Frederica with a grim look in his eyes after taking a fist to the top of his head. Frederica smiled, covering her mouth, laughing, and then turned her attention to the cityscape of Costul. Frederica, come on, let us go. We do not have that much time. We have come all the way here as siblings, so we have to enjoy ourselves in our own way.
Chapter 5.
And so, accompanied by his elated sister, Garfield's tour of Costul began. However, in terms of tourism, none of the 5 great cities had as few attractions as Costul. Frederica, Costul is a key industrial center for the kingdom, which is why there are fewer recreational things to do in the city, which is preferable for me. But, Frederica, who had comparatively more experience with Costul than Garfield, described the city. The tepidness of her explanation indicated that she was concerned that she might bore Garfield with a lack of novelty. But, Garfield, hey, sis. What's that big box over there? With wide emerald eyes, Garfield pulled on Frederica's sleeve, enjoying the city to the fullest. Frederica sighed with relief at the sight of her brother, inquisitive and simply fond of big, squarish things. Frederica, calm down, Garf, not only that one over there, but all the factories throughout the area use magic creation tools. Garfield, magic creation tools, huh? Garfield tilted his head and clicked his fangs at the unfamiliar words. Frederica, pleased by Garfield's reaction, asked, now listen, okay? Frederica, pleased with the reaction, held up a finger and began to elaborate. Magic creation tools were the most important secret that supported the industrial city of Costul. Garfield called it a big box, but Costul had a wide variety of magic creation tools, each of which had its own function in relation to the products it manufactured. Frederica did not know the details of how the device works, but its power source was a magic stone. It was a complex and bizarre assembly of iron and wood that does the job faster and more accurately than manual labor. Frederica, the city of Costul was one of the first to incorporate the magic creation tool system into its work, and it has expanded and become one of the 5 great cities. Unlike the other 4 cities, it is a rare place that is recognized for its new ways of being rather than its old ways. Garfield, wow, that's amazing. Frederica, of course it is, of course, it is. Garfield, why is sis so proud about this? Upon explaining the origins of the city, Frederica seemed pleased with herself, to which Garfield looked annoyed. Frederica continued, actually, in response to Garfield, Frederica, now, Garf has acknowledged magic creation tools as an amazing achievement. But what if I told you that the master's own Mathers family were involved in the creation of magic creation tools? Garfield, Frederica, oh, my dear, what a grim face. It is not the master himself, but rather his father, you know. Garfield, don't talk about anything that has to do with that bastard Roswell. Having been explained plainly, Frederica fell silent with a sour look on her face. It was a failure. Garfield sighed grimly, but the fact remained. The industrial city of Costul was supported by magic creation tools, the achievement of Roswell's predecessor. Roswell K. Mathers, the previous head of the family, was a great benefactor to Costul. That was why the Mathers family's main mansion is located so close to the city. Frederica, technically, I guess you could say that he made the city that was near his main mansion flourish. One would like to think that even Roswell's predecessors would not have foreseen this far into the future, but the Mathers family is so unfathomable that one can hardly be so sure. Anyways, Frederica, if you are interested, Garf, why don't we take a tour of the area? Frederica suggested this to Garfield, who was repeatedly glancing at the factory and itching to see it. Garfield responded, "Oh." As his eyes lit up, Garfield, "Oh, but you know." Frederica, "What now? You sound pathetic and unmanly. Are you so offended when the products are connected to the master?" Garfield, "That's one of the reasons, but it ain't the only one. But if my amazing self does whatever I want, sis is gonna be bored." Frederica choked up at Garfield, scratching his cheek with one finger. It was an entirely out-of-place concern. If he could extend that consideration naturally to everyone, even Ram would show a bit more interest. Frederica, "No, that is not possible. That girl is an iron wall." "A pity." Garfield, wait, why are you suddenly starting to pity my amazing self, sis? I won't be satisfied with something like the distance between Pickett and the moon is unbridgeable." Frederica, "It is nothing. Besides, your concern is unnecessary." Garfield, "Ah?" Frederica, "I was the one who invited you today, Garf. That would be better if this were our last opportunity, though it probably is not, right? Then it is best that you enjoy it. It was not like it was back then when they wanted to, but didn't have the opportunity." There was a decade-long rift in the relationship between Frederica and Garfield, but now there were no obstacles in the way of bridging the gap. Thinking about it that way, it was no trouble for her to spend the whole day today for her younger brother's sake. Garfield, "Thanks, Frederica, you are very welcome." Frederica's hesitation was fleeting, and upon Garfield's honest thanks, Frederica responded with few words. As it was, the pair's legs walked to one of the factories they could see. "Frederica, it looks like this is where they are processing magic ore." As they approached the factory, they could see the full extent of the large-scale magic creation tools, visible from a distance. Piles of magic ore surrounded the magic creation tools, and a faint scent of mana tickled their nostrils. The effect of the crystallized mana-bearing ore became more acute when the ore was processed. It can then be used for various purposes, such as ornamental items or as a crystal lamp. This factory appeared to be another factory specializing in the processing of such magic ores. Frederica, "If there is a staff member present, we can speak to them." Garfield, "Sis." Frederica, "Garf?" While Frederica's eyes wandered around, looking for someone, Garfield suddenly stopped her with a low voice. When she turned around to see what was the matter, Garfield's gaze was directed toward the rear of the factory. Frederica turned her gaze in the same direction and saw a strange and mysterious figure. "Frederica? Huh?" An unexpected sight caused a feeble voice to escape Frederica's throat. This was completely unexpected, a surprise from something that came from beyond her thoughts. It was an existence that could only be described as a strange object. It was about the size of a dog at most, appearing to be in a low, hunched posture like an animal. However, its entire body was covered with shiny, hard skin, the color of which shimmered in an unnatural manner. It was a strange object that seemed to be covered with coils of flames and water. Frederica, that is, at first glance, it appeared to be an ornamental object made with a sensibility that was hard to comprehend. That is, if it were not wriggling, that is, if it did not turn toward them, what seemed to be its light. And then, "Garfield, you." The moment Garfield tried to take a step forward, a wind occurred. A sharp, life-threatening wind struck Garfield and Frederica.
Chapter 6.
Without even waiting to see how it would react, Garfield snapped his fangs at the attacker. Before his eyes, the identity and intentions of the other party were unclear. However, it was nice to know that its intention could be easily understood. Hostility for hostility, just like Yakran's reversed day and night. Garfield, "So, if you're going for it, I ain't going to give you any quarter." Garfield said this as he deflected the blade of wind that came from directly in front of him. The magic also had intensity, the magic of a skilled mage was denser. If that was expressed in terms of the quality of magic, the quality of this blade of wind was very close to the worst. Since the most recent wind magic he saw was Ram's, the difference between them was even greater with consideration of his favoritism. And, finishing his evaluation of the situation instantly, Garfield lightly tapped the ground with his toes. The impact that was released from his toes was used to deliver a blow through the divine protection of Earth spirits, hitting his opponent, Garfield. The entity, which was more like a mass of glowing objects as opposed to a cluster of glowing lights, was shattered by the impact. There was a high-pitched sound of stones breaking, but it was not the death cry of it itself. While some animals do not have vocal organs to make sounds, this felt different. First, it was too fragile. Though it was of poor quality, for an entity capable of wielding magic to have this sort of durability. Garfield, you're an inconsistent one, you bastard. Thinking it was aiming for something, Garfield took one more step forward. The divine protection of Earth Spirit's blow could not be aimed very precisely. By its nature, the blessing's basic principle was that it drew mana from the earth and transformed it into vitality for the user. Garfield reversed this basic principle by sending force into the earth rather than drawing it up, thereby reversing the flow, and causing the ground to cave in or rise up. Divine protections are not magic, and the sensation could not be explained to those who do not possess the same divine protection. The results that occur resemble magic, but unlike magic, there was no way to convey them. It is like the process of breathing. He never thought that his unknown opponent would be so fragile that he could be crushed by the effort of a mere breath. And Garfield's theory was correct. Frederica, now standing 2 steps behind him, shouted, and the hairs on the back of Garfield's neck stood on end. He did not take his eyes away from it. The object that was shattered by the blow was still there in front of them. And yet, Frederica's cry suggests a different story. A strange object rained down from above the roof onto Garfield's head. Garfield, ha! With a sharp exhale, Garfield clasps his palms together powerfully above his head. The object that had just fallen between the palms was hit and shattered, its physical durability immediately overwhelmed. As the shimmering debris dispersed, his palm felt a rough sensation. Feeling as if he had crushed a lump of sand, Garfield wrinkled his nose and kicked away the ensuing flames and wind. Garfield, as with the first wind blade, there was a resurgence of wind and a confluence of flames. However, both were still of low-quality magic and were easily overcome by Garfield's physical counterattacks. Of course, while this level of threat was nothing to be concerned about, Garfield, damn, there's so many of them, it's Hieromedoi's brute force. Grumbling, Garfield sniffed. There was an alien smell that slowly crept into his olfactory senses. It was not a bad smell, but it was at the same time a fishy and iron rust sensation. Although it was only a rough estimation, he could sense that there are more than a dozen of these objects similar to the 2 that he had just seen. Frederica, Garf, what do we do? Raising her voice, Frederica quickly countered one of them with her bare hands. With a single blow, with only using her transformed wrists, her ability to switch instantly was quicker than Garfield's. However, once he saw Frederica's cuffs were torn as she did so. Garfield, tisk. With a click of the tongue, Garfield glared at the dangerous objects that surrounded them. Although he and Frederica could probably wipe them out without so much struggle, Garfield, I've got no more reason to go at ya bastards for too long. No, rather, the opposite was true. Garfield, I'm gonna blow ya to bits right now, ya bastards. Frederica, HK. Garf, please wait. Doing that here would be, blood boiling in his head, Garfield swung his leg over his head with a mighty swing. Just before his foot fell, Frederica shouted to stop him, but it was too late. As the force of the attack hit the ground, an overflow of power permeated the earth through Garfield's heels, and objects in various parts of the factory were struck from directly below. The next moment, the factory building itself crumbled as if it had experienced a massive explosion.
Chapter 7.
I have a clear understanding of the events that took place. I also know that it was a difficult situation that required extremely difficult decisions. Their hands were laced on an ebony desk, and their stern voices and expressions looked at them directly. Their gaze gave her the illusion of physical weight, and so Frederica was hurriedly bowing her head. Frederica, yes, I am very sorry. And see, Garf too. Garfield, oh. Ow, ow. Sorry, I know it's my fault. Tugging on Garfield's ear next to her, she made him express the same apologetic gesture as she did. Although the gesture was not polite, Garfield was sorry in his own way, and it was probably true. The question was whether or not he will be able to convey his remorse to the other party, however. I accept your apology, Frederica. Really, you accept it? Why such a need for validation? Frederica, it is. Frederica muddled her words as she looked at the other person's face. This was not polite, but with this man on the other end of the line, it was not surprising. After all, this person's expression never varied from when Frederica and Garfield entered the room until now. It was a quality of a politician not to let his expression be read, but he was too thorough. The owner of these steely-looking features was Lino Rex. He was the mayor of the industrial city of Costul, one of the 5 great cities in the kingdom of Lagunica. Long story short, he was the most powerful person in Costul and was also responsible for the magical or processing plant and other facilities that Frederica and Garfield had unceremoniously blown up. Frederica and Garfield's outing took a dramatic turn when they were attacked by strange objects at a factory they were visiting for a tour of the magic creation tools, resulting in a massive explosion. Naturally, Frederica and Garfield were unable to leave without being taken into custody by the responding guards, leading up to the present situation. Lino, about those strange objects you have come across. Frederica, well, you may not believe us, but they did exist, okay? But we could not just let them attack us without a fight, so we struck back. As a result, the objects were destroyed, and the evidence was lost and scattered. However, Frederica was still uncertain as to what the objects were, unable to find the right words to describe them. At this point, she didn't want to sound like she made up an excuse on the spot to get out of the situation, but, Lino, no need to worry, we have confirmed their presence here as well. We are currently having a difficult time with the light bugs. Frederica, light bug, is it? Lino, they are called that for convenience. In answer to Frederica's question, Lino wrinkled his brow. This was the first time he has changed his facial expression since their arrival, but the change, causing his already stern face to appear even sterner, was unwelcome. Lino tapped his fingers on the desk, and looking into Frederica and Garfield's faces. Lino, those of you who are involved with Margrave Mathers know how this city has developed. It is now called one of the 5 great cities in the nation, and I have been appointed as city mayor, among other things, although I am not as qualified as I should be. Garfield, yeah, it's only gotten bigger in the last few decades, hasn't it? Sis told me that. So, Lino, behind that rapid development, the existence of those light bugs has been confirmed time and again. This is a largely unknown fact to the outside world. Garfield, Lino, curiously, I have never heard of any sightings of light bugs in other cities. The light bug has thus been considered an anomaly, existing only in the soil of Costul. Frederica frowned with her shapely eyebrows as she listened to Lino's explanation. There were always problems that come with every place. The existence of the sanctuary, with its barrier and tomb, was a prime example of this. As Lino told them, this was the first time Frederica had heard about Costul's lightbug. It was a topic that has been handled with such scrutiny and so much thought, she realized. Why did he confide such an important issue to Frederica and Garfield? Frederica, Lino Summer? Lino, I regret my inability on this matter, but I would like to ask Margrave Mathers to help with this. Right now, the city is experiencing an unprecedented outbreak of light bugs, which is disrupting the operation of the factories. Frederica, disrupting the operation. Frederica placed her hand over her mouth at Lino's plea, without changing her complexion or tone of voice. The factory where Frederica and the others were attacked by the object A lightbug was unoccupied. However, Frederica and Garfield were curious about the tools that had been left abandoned, obviously in the process of being worked on, and the magical or scattered about. That was probably the result of the light bugs occurring during the operations and forcing them to evacuate. Garfield, what's the point of talking to that bastard Roswell? Frederica's contemplation aside, Garfield's voice unapologetically cut in when Roswell's name was mentioned. For a beat, Lino pondered the relationship between Garfield and Roswell, but quickly snapped out of its stagnation, taking a breath with a Lino, I thought Margrave Mathers would have wisdom on how to solve the problem. You all must have thought that light bugs' ecology was strange as well. Frederica, although they were weak, they did have the ability to use magic. Lino, up until now, we have only had minor injuries. However, if we have serious injuries, much less, if deaths begin happening, it will be too late. The Margrave is also no stranger to Costul's problems. Frederica took in the strong language of the city's safety, swallowing her words. In fact, Roswell's title was Margrave of the West, and the industrial city of Costul was also located in a location that in a broad sense would be managed by Roswell. Damage to Costul could call into question the Margrave's ability to do more than merely collect taxes. Of course, that could be a fatal blunder as the sponsor of Emilia's participation in the royal selection. Frederica, it is one problem after another, so busy with it all indeed. Lino, wherever you are, peace does not last. It only makes a difference if things happen in the city or in the kitchen. That is what my wife tells me. Frederica, Ara, that is an excellent point. Frederica's lips relaxed slightly at the jest, which felt quite unlike him. Regardless, the appeal certainly needed to be shared with Roswell. Although the outing with Garfield would have been a letdown, the priority was work. So, Frederica, hiding a slight disappointment, called out Garf next to her. Frederica, Garf, you heard him. As for today, let us report to the master at Garfield. Nah, don't think so. Garfield simply shook his head at the request. Frederica sighed at his attitude. Garfield's dislike of Roswell was very serious, but this was a situation where issues of like and dislike must be put aside. Frederica, Garf, please do not make this personal. This is an important matter for Costul. Garfield, it's not that I don't want to do it because the bastard pisses me off. I'm talking about the fact that he can't just come over and fix it right now. Having said that, Garfield got up from the couch. Turning his gaze to the far end of the city mayor's office, Garfield, it's here, he snorted. Garfield. Immediately afterward, Garfield's gaze turned to where something unusual was happening. Near the wall, a bookshelf filled with books shook violently, and something slid out from behind it. Without hesitation, it tried to jump toward the window of the room. However, Garfield, I'm not gonna let you get away. Garfield stepped in with a roar, his fist slamming into the foreign object that traveled up the wall. The impact excessively exceeded its durability, and the sound produced by the light and the shattering of the wall rippled through the room. Lino, that just now was. Frederica, a light bug. The shattered entity sparkled and dispersed under Garfield's blow. Seeing this, the voices of Lino and Frederica overlapped in turn. Frederica saw that it was the exact same as the light bugs that they encountered at the magic or processing plant. Frederica, the wall aside, Lino Summer, are light bugs all over the city. Lino, negative. At the very least, the instances of finding them were limited to the area around the factories. Even on the rare occasions when they went out into the city, they were never found in City Hall. Garfield, no way. Did they follow us? Garfield's eyes narrowed as he picked up a piece of the smashed light bug. There is no doubt that Garfield's mutterings were the most plausible theory at the moment. It was more realistic to say they were following them from the processing plant than that the light bugs were lurking everywhere. Frederica, but what is the purpose of this? The light bug's proclivities, perhaps. Garfield, they suddenly attacked my amazing self and sis, you know. That kind of thinking isn't something my amazing self would expect at all. Frederica, Garf, you are smart enough to. Aside from his usual apprehensions, Garfield's intuition when it came to fighting was sharp. And Frederica had no hesitation in following Garfield's instincts. In this situation, the light bugs tracked Frederica and Garfield to the city hall. Lino, definitely, to overhear what was said. Garfield, this is proof that someone is controlling these insect things. Lino, impossible. As I said, the light bugs have been around since this city began to be developed. At the conclusion, Lino stood up and waited. Indeed, if his testimony was true, this light bug controlling entity has been involved since their outbreak. The aim of their efforts, the nature of light bugs, and everything else remained unclear. Frederica, HK, within the line of sight of Frederica, who swallowed spit, a crack appeared in the city mayor's office wall. It was not the effect of Garfield's blow, but a deliberately inflicted destructive force. Besides, The destruction was not only on one of the walls but extended to all 4 walls, no, even to the floor and ceiling. In other words, fine fissures were appearing all over the city hall. Garfield, they're crystal fucking clear. Garfield, with a twinkle in his eye, howled when he realized it was an enemy attack. With that, while coming to the same conclusion as her younger brother, Frederica looked back to Lino. But, in the midst of a rapidly changing situation, priorities should be carefully examined, and, Frederica, Lino Summer. How many people are in City Hall now? Lino. 12. Understanding the meaning of Frederica's question, Lino instantly arrived at the answer. In response, Frederica shouted, "Garf, Frederica, please break a hole in the floor." "I am going out, Garfield, tisk." As soon as he was told, Garfield immediately stomped the floor. At the same time, Frederica leapt to Lino, carrying the large man easily and launching him backward into the window. With a high-pitched crash, Frederica shattered the window, falling with Lino to the ground below. Lino, even in this predicament, Lino's tenacity to not let out a single scream was remarkable. The city mayor's office is on the 3rd floor of City Hall, a height that Frederica could easily land from. But that would not be the case for ordinary people, so, Garfield, sis, let's go. Frederica, I understand. With an aggressive voice, Garfield signaled to Frederica. In response, the windows of the 2nd floor of the City Hall broke one after another in front of Frederica. It was the City Hall employees being thrown out of the building with a mighty crash that was the cause of it. Frederica, HK. Frederica caught them falling, blue in the face and screaming, just outside. She rescued one and immediately lowered them to the ground to rescue the next. 8 times in a row, and after more than half the number of people Lino had mentioned had been successfully rescued. Frederica, the building is. The first signs of its collapse completely spread throughout the building, causing the City Hall to collapse in front of Frederica. A plume of smoke and shock surged through the air, while Frederica's blonde hair fluttered wildly, her eyes straining to see. The 4 missing staff members and Garfield, all of them now lying on the ground, are speechless. Such a long, uncomfortable silence, and, Garfield, bar. And then, one figure broke through the plume of smoke and leapt out with great force. No, there was only one figure, but the figure had one person in their right hand, one in their left, one on their back, and one in their mouth. Frederica, Garf. Are you all right? Garfield, Car PFFT. Who the hell do you think my amazing self is? Well, for a moment, it looked like we weren't gonna make it out in time, but, Garfield answered by lowering the 4 people he helped onto the ground and turning them around by their shoulders, feeling relieved that there was no sign of injury other than black smudges on their faces from the fumes. However, Frederica, surely a collapse this large is not a coincidence, is it, Garfield, right? This means we found out something inconvenient to 'em, and they want to keep us quiet. Frederica shuddered as Garfield looked behind him at the wreckage of City Hall, muttering to himself. It was unexpected that a half-day vacation together with siblings would turn out to be entangled in such a situation. Lino, thank you all for your help. On behalf of the staff, I thank you as well. Then Lino, who was also involved in the same devastation, approached. Lino thanked them, but having already fixed his clothes, his composure did not match that of the victims in this disaster. Lino, I was particularly amazed at the way you carried yourself. I admire it greatly. Garfield, oh, so you are. You know, I'm kinda losing my groove, but we don't have time to talk about this. Lino, indeed. This is a clear attack on the city. The tone of his voice dropped a degree, and Lino clearly recognized the current situation with his words. An attack on the city. The attack was aimed at City Hall, the hub of the city, and the city's mayor. It was definitely a situation that needed to be recognized as such. Frederica, the perpetrator is manipulating the light bugs and plunging the city into chaos. Though their aims are unknown, Garfield, our amazing selves have noticed. Frederica, and, the other party must have realized that we have noticed. The situation is not in our favor. Unexpected and unanticipated interactions may be mutual, but there was a difference in the level of preparation that has been built up to that point. By nature, a battle depended on preparation before it even began. The mindset of the one who was not prepared to be hit was different from that of the one who was prepared to be hit. The situation proceeded as if to support the conclusions of Frederica and the others. Frederica, people from all over the city rushed to the collapsed city hall to see what had happened. Amidst all this, a roar was heard in the opposite direction of City Hall, the area where the factories were located. For the second time today, there was a roar in the area where Garfield caused the explosion. Frederica's emerald green eyes widened as she turned to see what had caused it. Frederica, HK, that is, surprise escaped her lips as a tower of light shot up in Frederica's gaze, a spire of light, decorated with complex and bizarre patterns, shimmering with non-uniform colors over its entirety. The sight of its surface writhing in the distance was a frightening realization that it was not a tower at all. That was a collection of light bugs. They gathered together at a tremendous rate and formed a tower of light. Frederica, this is a terrible day off. Garfield, damn. I knew it, going out of the forest would be no good. Frederica and Garfield's respective lamenting voices overlap, echoing up into the sky. The industrial city of Costul, and the day off of the demi-human siblings, was swept away by a shimmering malice.